Welcome to the show, Gearheads. We just watched Max Verstappen win another race. He wins the Formula One Imola Grand Prix, his 65th career victory. Congratulations to Mr. Verstappen and the Red Bull team. This is Jon Massengale. I'm in the studio in Austin, Texas, and I'm joined by Bob Varsha, and Chris Medland will be joining us. He will not be at the circuit, as our intro said. He will be joining us live from his studio at home here momentarily. And Bob Varsha, I'll start with you. And you're also overseas as well, my friend.
That's right. I'm in Barcelona. Finally got a hotel room. So we're good to go here.
All right. Well, yeah, looking good, sounding good, Bob. And I'll tell you what, when we were talking in the pre-race that this could be just a one-stopper, just a regular old race, this thing has delivered today. What a fantastic race it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, and let's cover ourselves with a little glory here. We said if there are interruptions, yellow flags, virtual safety car, we saw all of those today, and we saw what happens as cars dove for the pits. Some guys made tire changes. I'm not sure everybody went out on fresh tires because the supply was getting really limited there toward the end. But, the cream floated at the top again. Max Verstappen was once again invincible, just motored away from the field. And then they stopped the race and sent him on their way, and he motored away again. So they've definitely got something they can work with there at Red Bull, at least as far as Max is concerned. Yuki Tsunoda, well, he made his way up to 10th in points. So good for him.
Yeah.
But that shows what happens when you get those sorts of interventions that close the pack up, as Max said in his post-race interview. He sounded excited to me. He sounded like this was fun. It's so fun to go out there and, win the race by half a minute and drive around all day and never get on television and what have you. This was interesting. And we found out that he was racing on a sim earlier today. The guy just can't get enough. And boy, he just did it. And, kudos to McLaren. They let their drivers race at the end of the race. They got close. They finished 2-3, which was really making the best of a kind of an embarrassing situation with Max beating them. But then they picked up every point available from there on out. And there were some great drives, really, to look at the results, which I just lost on my phone. Okay, Norris and Piastri 2-3, Hamilton and Leclerc from 11th and 12th.
Amazing.
Moving up to 4th and 6th. And I thought the announcers did a pretty good job of staying on top of the fact that new tires or younger tires makes a huge difference. If you had, as few as 10 laps less on your tires than the guy you were chasing, you had a pretty darn good shot at him. And we saw that happen on a number of occasions. Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, all the way down this race. It was really, really great from start to finish. And you mentioned Max Verstappen at the in the podium interview there, where he was sounding excited, right? And sounded like he was, glad to be racing. And I did find it interesting. The one little thing that he said, I love racing any kind of car. I thought that was interesting, considering the week that he had. What was his pseudonym where he went racing in a GT3 car?
Franz Hermann.
Franz Hermann. Yes, I thought that was. But yeah, so that
but
was.
If you saw the video from the Nordschleife, you saw that even with security around him, Max Verstappen wasn't fooling anybody, and all the autograph seekers and photographers were there. And he had a good time driving a GT3 Ferrari. He owns a team. So you can't get enough of it. And that's a great thing.
Yeah, exactly. He cannot get enough. Well, I have pages of notes here because it was so much fun to keep track of this race today. And I tell you, the one thing I did right at the top of my notes towards the end there, but that this was just what the doctor ordered for several teams and drivers. Number one, I'll have to say, Lando Norris finishing ahead of his teammate. And on the team radio, he didn't sound elated, but he sounded a little more upbeat than he has, of course, finishing ahead of Piastri. And then, of course, Ferrari. Wow, what the doctor ordered after you have to say, pretty much disastrous qualifying yesterday, P11 and 12 qualifying, and finishing, fourth and sixth, you said today. So, I mean, that is, and Hamilton, right? Hamilton has not been happy in him.
Ahead of Leclerc.
Yep, finishing ahead of his teammate.
And again, it was the tire advantage. And when you have it, you need to pass your teammate. You can't let an opportunity like that go by.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. What did you think about so Albon finished fifth, and there was the battle there with Leclerc. And I wanted to get you and Chris when he gets on, because when I saw that, I thought that was just racing. And I didn't get to watch the replay again, but did you hear what Leclerc said? He said, he came on the radio when they said, give the position back. He said, oh, so that's what racing is now, huh? And I kind of agree with him on that. But again, I saw it one time. Maybe you saw a replay. What do you think?
To be honest, I thought it was legitimate racing.
Okay, good.
Leclerc, lovely guy, historic driver in the series, now 75 years of age. But he seems to be, let's say, frustrated. He pops up on the radio and gets sarcastic, and he and Lewis, to a certain extent, are frustrated by the fact that the Ferrari is not everything they hoped it would be. And so now, he gets aggravated. You can't blame him for it, but maybe he should just shut up and drive, because I thought that was a pretty neat sequence, and it looked like Albon was going to get another shot at him. Didn't quite happen. Good fun.
Yeah, and you got to be happy if you're Williams. Again, Albon finishing fifth, Carlos Sainz finishing eighth.
Oh, yeah.
Great points for the team. Wow.
Yep.
Going back to tires and everything.
Yeah, I think we are. And the story of what Aston Martin did in the way of tires with both of its drivers, but particularly Fernando, is one that'll be interesting to read, because obviously some teams nailed it. Ferrari, Red Bull, certainly, McLaren. It looks like the Astons didn't have the grip they needed at clutch time.
Yeah. Yeah, and, just looking through this order, some names that, Hadjar, again, impressed me today. He ended up finishing P9. You mentioned that Tsunoda got points for the other Red Bull car there. So, but Hadjar, you got to give it hats off to him as well.
Yeah, he's a quality driver and a great rookie. He just keeps knocking on that door, scoring points here and there, qualifying well most of the time. And it's just a part of that learning curve. I mean, we've been going on and on about Oscar Piastri and how much he's learned and demonstrated in his first 2+ years in the series. And you've got to expect that sort of thing from every rookie. And I think Hadjar is doing that. Antonelli, we still don't know what his problem was. He had to pull off the track in the Mercedes. But this is a crop of good young rookies. And it's going to be fun to watch them develop. And who knows, 2 years from now, they might be battling for poles and race victories like Oscar is.
Well, it's really true about this class of rookies. It's really exciting to watch. And to say, that you've got, Antonelli has been kind of the star so far. But, and that's another story we'll talk about, because he did not finish the race today. But Hadjar has been, I'm not going to say a pleasant surprise, because if you're here in Formula One, you deserve to be discussed. But Chris Medland has joined us. He's in his studio. He is not at the race, and taking a break for a well-deserved break. But he's at his home studio in UK. And Chris, we were just relishing in what a very, not surprising, but I guess it is surprising, because it was a great race. So much to talk about.
Yeah, I quite like it when we talk things down and they go the other way. Under promise and over deliver. Always the way to do it, isn't it? Because too often we've had races that are promising so much and don't quite get there. We had some great races, like based on grids in recent weeks. I even think back to like Suzuka, for example. And the way that everyone drove in that was excellent, but it didn't create huge drama or excitement, and you got a processional race. So it was nice it went the other way. But I think that was a race still. We said the start would be crucial. It was a race won and lost, certainly from the battle between Verstappen and Piastri at the start.
Yep. Yeah. In fact, Piastri said it in his podium interview that he just braked too early. He did not play that first corner right, did he?
No. I think it was interesting because just saw him as well, sat in the cool-down room, watching it back for the first time. And I still lean more towards Verstappen pulled a brilliant move there. I think he absolutely nailed the braking. Around the outside, he had to get far enough ahead that Piastri couldn't run him out of road. And it's not easy to do. It's the first time you're hitting the brakes in true anger with all those cars around on heavy fuel, on tyres that were, you tried to warm them up, but then they cooled down on the grid. That feel is so hard to get right. And I think, yes, Piastri was maybe 1% the wrong side of where he wanted to be, or 2% the wrong side of where he wanted to be. But Verstappen was at 100% and then some. To get that move done. I thought that was a great pass.
I mean, it really
isn't it a great thing where we get a first turn like that. You know, it's not decided because somebody banged wheels or put a hole in someone's side pod and ran them off the track. I mean, it was a brilliant move executed by Max Verstappen. And, Oscar put up what fight he could, and everybody acknowledged, holy smokes, Max just... he just was an assassin on that occasion.
Well, it is so great that we are watching a top athlete at the very, very pinnacle of his game, because Max just, it's Michael Jordan-esque, it's LeBron, whatever you want to say. He was perfection on that corner, because, we say Piastri, braked a little early, but it was tiny. We're talking, a millisecond there. But Max is just doing everything perfectly, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's strange. I keep thinking back to pre-season where I said I thought Max would win the title because McLarens would take points off each other. And I think we spoke about it recently, didn't we? Whether it was on yesterday's show or Wheel to Wheel. At some point, I got asked about it and kind of said, no, I think McLaren can kind of afford, with the pace advantage they've got, to let their drivers fight it out a little bit more. Now, I think they did the right thing today, letting their drivers fight, but Max showed... It doesn't matter if his car is nowhere as it was in Miami. He was kind of unlucky to end up fourth rather than third because of the virtual safety car that helped Russell get ahead of him. But beyond that, he's come from being over half a minute behind the McLarens to knowing that if he got a move done there, he could win the race and would win the race, basically. As you say, the way he executes is just phenomenal. And it's really exciting to watch because it does mean we're not just seeing a two-horse race between two McLaren teammates, which will still be fun. But Max being in that mix is obviously going to be epic. And it adds the extra variable between the two McLaren drivers, doesn't it? So it's set up brilliantly, I think, for this season. And every time I think McLaren might walk away with it, Max just reminds us, like, no chance.
All right, guys, we got to sneak a quick break in right here at the top of the hour, and we'll be back right after these messages. Okay, we're still live on YouTube. Let's see what we got here. Yeah, we got lots of folks watching here. There's Bill Ricker. Bill says, why are commentators Nora saying Piastri's tires are off when he finished last lap? Older tires used to getting the upset that Max is now reclaimed. Okay. I like Mike Bowles. A race as I've seen in a bit. Joe of Oyster Bay, a pretty good Imola race. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. A really good Imola race, actually. Hamilton up 8 spots. Yeah, Kevin Kelly. Good point. Nice. Yeah, Kevin says still no points. And Yuki up 10 places.
Fernando.
Yeah. Yep. Alonso still no points. Joe says he still needs to see the Leclerc-Albon replay. I still don't understand F1. He says, yeah. Hey, Chris, before you got on, I was saying that I thought that was just good racing. I didn't think because Leclerc came back and said, so this is what racing is now? And I tended to agree with him, but I only saw it once. I didn't see the replay. What do you think?
Yeah, I was torn on it. It was tough because we'd seen a few moves like that. And obviously they're not always going to be identical. but the car on the outside in that scenario had always been allowed enough space to stay on track. But I don't know at which point they're meant to take the rule of how far alongside your car's meant to be when you're overtaking. And you are, if you're going around the outside, putting yourself in a dangerous spot, essentially. So I'm not too sure whether I would view it as something that should be penalised or not. I'm with you. I think I need to look at it multiple times. It felt harsh first time up to tell him to give that back. I guess I can understand why Ferrari did it, because it was under investigation, and if that was a penalty, he could have lost two spots. So you cut your losses.
Hi, this is Karun Chandok, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
There's a growing expense eating into your company's profits. It's your cloud computing bill. You may have gotten a deal to start, but now the spend is sky high and increasing every year. What if you could cut your cloud bill in half and improve performance at the same time? Well, if you act by May 31st, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure can help you do just that. OCI is the next generation cloud design for every workload, where you can securely run any application, including AI projects, faster and more securely for less. In fact, Oracle has a special promotion where you can cut your cloud bill in half when you switch to OCI. The savings are real. On average, OCI costs 50% less for compute, 70% less for storage, and 80% less for networking. Join Modal, Skydance Animation, and today's innovative AI tech companies who upgraded to OCI and saved. Offer only for U.S. new customers with a minimum financial commitment. See if you qualify for half off at oracle.com/formula. Oracle.com/formula. All right, gentlemen, we've been basking in this glow of this race because it was really a great race. And again, a little surprising for Imola. And the first thing that came to my mind as this race was unfolding, I thought, wouldn't it be a shame if this race went away? And Chris, I see you smiling. Yesterday, I guess, on a post-qualifying show, we talked about the possibility of this race going away, and it is a possibility, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. It's out of contract after this year, so that was the last race of the current deal. I do think that the only way it stays on is if it's on a rotational basis, because of so many different venues that want to be on the calendar and the money that they can pay. And that's the thing that Imola can't really do to the same level. And it's a tough one. It's a great track to watch racing on when the racing is good. It's a great track to watch qualifying on. But we saw last year, essentially, a fairly processional race here. We do get those sometimes too. I mean, that is true of any circuit. And I think we have to remember that whenever people talk about great tracks of racing or poor ones. If you get cars in pace order and no incidents, you're going to get a pretty dull race. That's the nature of qualifying everyone in the quickest at the front and the slowest at the back. But I do think that I'm trying to keep my rose-tinted specs off right now. There's part of me that's like, yeah, it'd be gutting to lose it. Flip side is, I know, I'm lucky enough that I'm sat here in my studio, but a number of my colleagues at the track took nearly 3 hours to get into the circuit today with traffic issues this morning. So it's a very old school circuit, but that means there's a lot of old school issues that come with that in terms of trying to get nearly 250,000 people in over a race weekend to a tiny venue, essentially, in a small town in Italy. So it's not a cut and dried just because it looks great on TV or the racing was good this year. That means it will stay. But I think there's enough goodwill towards it. It's the sort of circuit that people want to see racing on and the drivers love, that I think we might see discussions still. And if it doesn't happen this time around, if there's not an extension that happens right now, that doesn't mean it won't happen again in future. With Stefano Domenicali being from Imola, or from the region at least, he will have contacts there that they won't disappear as he stays in the role of CEO of Formula One. So it could well be something that's revisited depending on the makeup of the calendar.
Yeah, and look, I love your rotational idea. I say your idea, your comment there about it, because that does make a lot of sense. So hopefully that will happen. But I want to go back to the racing today because it was really so good. And the one thing that it did occur to me, did McLaren make a strategic error, or was it just the timing of pitting Piastri awfully early in the race? It was lap 14 when Piastri pitted. What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, I think because they were second on the road, McLaren were thinking, how do we put pressure on Verstappen in the lead, and track position again being crucial. And I think if you look at the undercut that Leclerc got, because Leclerc made an even earlier pit stop and he jumped ahead of George Russell and a number of cars, I think McLaren thought there's a chance here. If we get the pit stop in first, then we can come out ahead of Max. So I believe they were just thinking they were going to force Verstappen to respond. I was surprised that Red Bull didn't respond, because if they were thinking they needed to, they had to do it instantly. As soon as they didn't, they left themselves vulnerable if Piastri could lap quickly enough. But to be fair, Verstappen was clearly managing his tyres prior to that, felt he had enough pace to hold the gap big enough to pit ahead of Piastri and come out. So I think it may be at that point what McLaren did was also underestimate the potential performance of the Red Bull. And when Verstappen needed it, he could just call on it to make sure that he wasn't under threat. And having then made that pit stop, yes, that put Piastri in a really tough position. He was still hurt, wasn't he, by the virtual safety car as well, that gave Norris a free stop. But other things didn't go his way that maybe wouldn't make that pit call quite so damaging if it had just run clean for a lot longer.
Hey, Bob, I know you're having technical difficulties, but I'll throw a question at you and test your microphone. What about the? I saw online a couple of tweets or something about, Red Bull got lucky with the safety car, but it's not. Yes, I suppose there's some truth to that, but also Max put them in the position to be able to do that. Number one, and they, he managed the tires, and that's racing in my mind.
No question about it. I mean, you could argue everybody got a break when the safety cars came out. It slowed everybody down. Everybody saved on tires. Those who wanted to change, changed. And even though it cut his lead down to practically nothing, Max handled the restarts beautifully. And, it was just another element of his game today. He was just on it and just was not going to be beaten.
I thought when we had the second safety car, I was about to say, okay, the safety car giveth and the safety car taketh away. But Max just did what Max does. And Chris, were you thinking the same thing, or did you figure, or were you already ahead of it and going, Max is probably just going to take off again?
No, I was thinking of taking away from him, actually. I couldn't tell at that point because obviously he'd had clear air. He'd done a brilliant job in the first stint. And yes, the timing of the virtual safety car allowed him to suddenly have a huge advantage. But as you guys rightly point out, it had given him a bigger gap, but he still was the lead car in clear air, and he'd earned that right to be there. And then he looked after his tyres so much better. Lando Norris also got the same benefit. So then having the safety car, I thought, everything that's gone right for Max from a position of strength is wiped out right at the end. The only thing that I thought maybe helped him at that point was the fact that the McLaren tyre advantage that we've seen in, say, Miami and at certain other races, you need a longer stint than 10 laps to really see the benefit of it. It's not just raw pace over one lap, as we see in qualifying, but it's how that gap gets bigger and bigger the longer a stint goes on. So I didn't think he'd be under quite as much pressure, but I thought if the McLaren was quicker, then obviously being the lead car as well, you don't get DRS to defend. I thought he could be in trouble, but he was helped in some ways by the fact that Norris was stopped as well for fresh tyres. Max, Red Bull will have weighed this up. They'll have known they could make a pit stop, get out still in the lead, and that McLaren would either do that and drop Norris behind Piastri, or wouldn't, and then he would have a tyre advantage over both. Again, essentially, the size of his advantage that he'd earned earlier in the race is what then led to being able to make that pit stop on a safety car. But when you get to the end of the race and you kind of see how it's played out, that was a pretty dominant win for Verstappen, all things considered. He never looked under threat. Norris couldn't really close him down in clear air. And Norris said it himself, didn't he, on team radio at the end of the race. Yeah. We didn't have the car to win today. I know Anthony Davidson said differently. I'm with Anthony in the sense that if the McLaren had led out of turn one, it would have had a good chance of winning that race. I don't know if the Red Bull advantage was big enough to overtake a McLaren on track. But flip side, I think once the Red Bull led out of turn one, I don't think there was much more McLaren could have done to get ahead.
Yeah, and I think in his winter interview, you could almost hear the delight, if that's the right word, and satisfaction as Max considered Monaco coming up next week. I mean, he's got a weapon now, and all he has to do is position it at the start of the race, and he'll have everything he needs to to let his skills carry him to another potential victory.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, don't underestimate the qualifying advantage that McLaren haven't had. So it's not just Red Bull. If any other team can get it right over one lap, and generally they've been trying to find ways of making their race pace better. I think of a Mercedes, for example. We have seen them be very quick over one lap. I worried for Ferrari because they couldn't turn that round this weekend, but their race pace was great, and we'll get stuck into that later, I'm sure. But you've got multiple potential factors in there, and of all of them, I'd still back Verstappen to be the one who gets the job done, and most likely to then stick it on pole. He's only 22 points now off the championship lead. Like, the top three are 22 points apart, and if you've got, say, 5 cars in that mix with both Mercedes and both McLarens, then what's to say there can't be quite a big swing in Monaco? So then we go to Barcelona, where there's going to be the front wing change that some teams are saying is going to be huge. Others are saying it's not going to do anything. But we'll wait and see who's kind of called that one, right? But this could well prove to be a pivotal triple header we're in the middle of right now in terms of the whole championship picture.
That's so true. It's funny. I wrote that down. I was like, we have a drivers' championship now, with Lando making ground on Piastri, Max winning, making ground. I mean, like you said, 22 points, Chris. This is a very fascinating year, and in this last year of these current rules, it's going to be awesome to see how this plays out. And speaking of safety cars, I was looking at the pit stops, and Ferrari did a great job today. The first pit stop when Leclerc was a 2.0, and I saw a 2.1 for Hamilton in there. I saw another 2.8 for Leclerc. They consistently have had probably during this race have had the best pit stops numbers for sure, and it just goes to show that Ferrari, every now and then we see a chink in the armor, right, where we think that they may be slipping back to their old ways, but today that was Chris. I think right before you got on, we were just talking about how it's a great day for Ferrari and the ground that they made up today.
Yeah, big time. I mean, in weird ways, they lost ground to Red Bull in the championship because Max won, and obviously with Yuki getting a point. So I think they lost 6 points to Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship, but they gained on Mercedes with, beating George Russell and Antonelli retiring. So again, that's something that's closed up, is the 3 teams fighting for second place, because let's be fair, McLaren in this sense are well away. They're nearly double the points of Mercedes. But it was a very good comeback, and it was one I wasn't expecting, to be honest, because it's not that I didn't think the pace was in the car. They'd shown it on Friday. It looked very strong race pace. But one, I thought they'd probably made changes to try and make it quicker over one lap and therefore probably hurt the race pace. But 2, being where they were in the field, you just didn't think they'd get a chance to show it. So strategy, again, very good. We talk about pit stop timing, Leclerc going in early, making ground, being able to use that. He thought he was unlucky with the VSC, but then lucky with the safety car, or luckier. But as Bob rightly points out, pretty much everyone got to make a pit stop then if they wanted to. I do think this was a real shot in the arm that Ferrari needed. Maybe just that proof that when we give them a hard time and they perform badly, that it's in there, that performance in the car is there if they can unlock it, that they haven't built a terrible machine. And also, they still can execute races well. So I thought for all the world, actually, when Hamilton got past Leclerc, he was going to have a shot at the podium. Piastri did well to hold on there. Flip side was a bit of a shame for Albon not being able to stay in that fight with that battle that we talked about. But that was because, we've got now 5 teams at times on race pace that can be in the mix. But I'd love to see the race trace. I wonder if Ferrari could arguably have had an equal car to McLaren and Red Bull today.
Ooh, that's a spicy take, because they looked great. All right, guys, let's get a quick break in. When we come back, I want to talk about my favorite battle of this race outside of the leaders. Listen to Speed City, back after these messages. Okay, who was it? Joe of Oyster Bay? He said about Bob's mic. Yes, it is so funny. Jonathan and I were just talking the other day, and we had a comment on YouTube about microphones, and somebody was saying, hey, the microphones weren't great on everybody, right? We had a guest who'd called in who was on a microphone that wasn't great. But Bob, we've been talking about getting you a microphone, but I listen to it when we're talking, and your mic typically sounds great. Today, when you're not on your AirPods, it's not as great. You hear a little echo. But I literally said, you know what? I'm going to get you the same mic that I have. We talked about this a long time ago. But we're definitely
Yeah.
we are definitely going to do. I was thinking we didn't need it because your AirPod mics, you know how they say they sound so good,
Well,
but there's just no reason not
I
to.
hate to-
So we're going to do
hate
it.
to admit it. Maybe they just ran out of juice or something. Although I've got green light, but
Yeah, who
no,
knows?
It definitely didn't want to play today.
But I'm definitely gonna ship you up a good mic, Bob, or have it delivered from Guitar Center or something. I want to get one of those.
Thank you, sir.
One of those. I forgot the name of it. A Zoom, I think it is. It's a Zoom mic. Anyway, it's a really good mic that I use at home. So, all right, let's see what else we got. Some comments. Andy P. The VSC call was just a killer for his race. Talking about Oscar. He said Oscar didn't think the mediums were going to hold up. They gained and came back, but Oscar on the radio didn't think that was going to happen. He's saying the tires were dead, so they boxed him in. So
Another lesson learned for Oscar. He's not the complete package yet.
Yep. Let's see. Anybody else here? Joe says it's unsurprising, or it's surprising how many drivers are the unluckiest. Alonso with this radio message today. I wish we could play that back.
Yeah. They were unlucky.
All right, here
They
we go.
were unlucky.
Hi, this is Jay Leno from JayLenosGarage.com, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, welcome back. And when we went to break, I said I wanted to talk about one of my favorite battles of this race. And it was a 7-time world champion versus a rookie. But Lewis Hamilton battling Kimi Antonelli. I thought that was great. It went on for quite a bit of the race, didn't it, Chris?
Yeah, it did. I thought Antonelli was essentially going to ruin Lewis's race because the Mercedes didn't look like it quite had the race pace. The Ferrari did, but the Mercedes was quick enough in a straight line and generally getting DRS from, I think it was Hadjar in front, wasn't it? That meant that Lewis couldn't get by. And that was the typical kind of Imola setup that we've been talking about where overtaking can be so difficult. But in the end, Lewis worked it out really nicely. It did look like Antonelli was struggling with the handling of his car a little bit more. But he made a good start. He got ahead of Hamilton at the start in the first place. So it was cool to see. And on the weekend when Antonelli for the first time has got into his usual driver room, the one that we talk about, usual one being the fact it's in the team motorhomes and team trucks that are only used for the European rounds. And Lewis left him a note because it was in Monza at the last European round of last year that Mercedes confirmed Antonelli would replace Hamilton. So Hamilton left a note for Antonelli with some advice and some words of wisdom in his driver room, which Antonelli got to read this weekend. And he hasn't given away what was in it. He said it was really nice and it said a lot about Lewis as a person and that he's stuck it on the wall to stay there to always see it. But yeah, he won't say what it is. And I just wonder, and it's not just me that says this. To be honest, it's Jess, my wife, also flagged this because she really wanted to get a shot of it or something for TV coverage and they weren't allowed. And I wonder if Netflix have got in there and it's going to be a nice kind of episode next year where Antonelli goes in for the first time and sees it. Or the team might do something around that as well. But it'll be fascinating to know what Lewis said.
Yeah, Antonelli actually said he gets emotional when he reads it, that Lewis would obviously say something very gracious about Antonelli's talent and what lies in store for a young driver with that talent. Good on him.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely touch. And I wonder if that was in Antonelli's mind when they were racing. If there was some sort of advice about, don't feel like you don't belong here or don't let others intimidate you. And he's there being like, all right, I'm taking your advice on. So it'll be really interesting to know what was said because, yeah, he did a good job in the first part of the race, Antonelli. Shame it was a loss of throttle response, apparently, that Mercedes said was the issue that ended Antonelli's race. And he was doing his best to get himself in the points. But it just seemed like Mercedes this weekend, maybe they overly prioritised qualifying. And that's why Antonelli was so upset yesterday. Russell, of course, did qualify third. But if they... I can understand why they would have done that. That makes sense with this track. We talked about how hard it is to overtake normally. So if you went all in on your qualifying pace and thought by getting up there, we've got every chance of scoring a big result, and then your race pace actually is suffering a bit more and overtaking's a bit more easy, then you do go backwards pretty quickly. And it looked like, Mercedes just didn't really have an answer. And not only a shame for Antonelli to retire for the first time, but George Russell as well, failing to finish in the top 5 for the first time.
Oh, that's right. For the whole year. That's right.
Mm.
He had a nice streak going there. At the top of the show, Chris, I said lots of overtakes, lots of strategy, fun race to watch. But also we had something that we hadn't seen a lot of. We had 2 DNFs. We had both Antonelli and Ocon stop on track and affect the race both times. I thought that was interesting too. You don't see DNFs that often in Formula One right now.
No, you tend to see them when teams spot a problem and bring their car into the pits. But the fact they were both in the same place, hearing the drivers talk in the driver cool-down room afterwards as well, and then I think it was picked up by Sky with Antonelli's on board. But I wonder if it was something to do with the bumpiness of the track and the curbs. Max Verstappen said, look, if we come back, if they do a new deal, I hope they resurface it or smoothen it out. And he asked Lando, how's your back? So it's clearly a bumpy one. There's certain big bumps that the drivers are feeling. And obviously the car's got to withstand that. So if that can rattle something loose, essentially, or eventually cause revs to spike and things like that, it can put too much energy through components and cause failures. So I do wonder if that played a role.
Yeah, these are fly-by-wire throttles. So, any kind of misconnection or broken sensor or, whatever it might happen to be.
No doubt.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah. But it's just unusual. I just thought that was a nice little addition to the race, that it just shake the strategy up a little bit. I don't think Ocon or Antonelli would agree with my assessment there, though.
Well, I agree with Chris. I think the fact that they happened in virtually the same place probably, speaks to the issue that both cars suffered from, and bumps are likely the one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lando Norris said a bump at turn 5 in the cool-down room. He said that he thought it had got better. He'd been taking a certain line, and then he hit it again. He was like, oh, no. And turn 5 is the right... Oh, technically, if they're doing the right numbering, it's the left hand of the first part of the Villeneuve chicane, where Tsunoda hit too much curb and crashed. So done on numbers, it's around that area, which then just after that is where both cars stopped.
Yep. I was thinking about, speaking of Ocon and the HAAS, that a pretty miserable weekend for HAAS. I mean, I know, yes, Behrman had the controversial positioning with his qualifying, but the fact that they finished with a DNF and a 17th for Behrman, pretty disappointing weekend for HAAS.
Yeah, definitely, especially with the boss in town.
Yeah, good point, Bob. Yeah, you mentioned that in your pre-show. Yeah, with the boss in town, for sure.
Yeah, Gene does come to quite a few races these days, but I wonder if that first one is because he likes Italy and obviously they have the relationship with Ferrari and Dallara in Italy, but it was the new motorhome as well, and that's a much nicer place for them to be, I think. So he was probably going to see his little private room that they'd hidden away for him, that was on their tour videos, where Esteban Ocon didn't know it was there, and he was told to push a wall, and he was like, wow, it's, this is secret. And he's like, this Gene's
something in here.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward. I've already told the team I'm coming down on Thursday in Monaco to have a coffee and check it out.
But
I saw that. I've been told maybe to wait till Friday, because obviously this is not relevant to the racing side of things, but for the teams, the logistical nightmare they now have to pack up everything in a very tight paddock in Imola, drive it round to Monaco, which will take them, a good 8 hours, I'd say, just because of the speeds the lorries can do, maybe a bit quicker. But then they have to wait for scheduled slots to get into the Principality of Monaco, because it's so tight and twisty. They can't just drive in. They'd cause chaos and cause traffic jams. So they get allowed certain times to go in. Then they get certain times from F1 to go onto the paddock, which is essentially a harbour key. And they get to go and park at certain times individually as teams to drop off all the equipment and start to build their motorhomes, and then move out and let others go. A couple of years ago, we had it where one team had left their trucks in the way and gone off for dinner or something, and then the slot opened up for another team to come in. They couldn't get in, and it delayed things so much that come Thursday, they're all still building their motorhomes. So I was kind of warned, well, brand new one, bigger, probably still learning how to put it together. Maybe HAAS might not be welcoming guests until Friday, just to be safe.
I did see that secret room, though. I thought that was pretty cool. That was a fun little addition to their new garage. All right, so just looking down the order here a little bit, I wrote down something here, and this is I'm glad Jonathan's not here, because Jonathan Green was had gotten really close to Liam Lawson. I wrote down, is Liam Lawson in trouble? And if you're in the Red Bull driver system and you're not performing that session, you could potentially be in trouble. But what do you think, Bob?
Well, it doesn't help Liam's situation that this Arvid Lindblad kid is doing so well and seems to be rocketing up the ladder of Red Bull priorities. It's not fun to watch when a guy like Liam Lawson, who is considered to have everything you want in a Formula One driver, and then for various reasons just can't get the job done. You don't want to witness a public heartbreak. I will say Lawson has handled it all very graciously, especially when he was demoted from Red Bull to Racing Bulls. But what are you going to do? It's a harsh environment. We talk about this all the time. He had 5 races to prove himself. Nigel Mansell had about 100. So it's crazy. We talk about experience, talk about guys like Oscar Piastri getting better and better and better and better. And I assume that's what Red Bull and every team is looking for, young drivers who just get better and better and better. And as was spoken about Flavio Briatore, go fast, don't crash, score points. And, if you can't show the ability to do that, no matter what car you're driving, you're just not going to last long anymore.
Yeah, and you said you wouldn't want to see the public heartbreak. Well, I think we already saw that when he was yanked out of the Red Bull car after 2 races.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, any thoughts on Lawson?
Yeah, I feel like there's been enough that he's shown, even going back to the Racing Bulls car at different times, that suggests that performance level that we got accustomed to as a replacement for Daniel Ricciardo when he was fairly close to Yuki, if not matching Yuki at times, and could get his elbows out. I think it's still there. I don't think he's lost that ability, but he seems to have lost the ability to bring it out regularly. He was really unlucky yesterday, to be fair to him. I think the timing of the incident with Colapinto, he was in the drop zone at that point, but starting a lap or on a lap in Q1 and couldn't complete it either. So he was one to drop out where he might well have had the pace to go through. But I think, Bob summed up really nicely that you're always going to be under pressure. There's the same expectations pretty much at every team now, or many teams, for quicker signs of what you can do. And he's maybe helped by right now he's into a run of tracks he's raced on in junior formula before, European rounds. But he will need to pick up a good result or two, I think, before the summer. I don't think he's going to be in real danger until the summer break, at which point, beyond there, Lindblad turns 18, will have shown enough in Formula 2 if he is doing the job, and then there could be a change if Lawson's still underperforming. But I think there's been enough of an indication that Lawson can find his feet again and might well find his feet again, that he's got enough time between now and then. What are we looking at? Probably 7 races between now and the summer break, where he could pull out a result or 2 that will cement him for the rest of the season. I think he deserves the rest of the season just because he's never had even a proper preseason to get stuck into the same team. He was a replacement previously, and then suddenly he gets preseason with Red Bull that didn't go smoothly, a car that clearly wasn't in a good place either at that time, gets 2 races and gets dropped, and he's suddenly back to a car that he didn't know that well because, he raced for that team, but he didn't do preseason like Hadjar has. It's not been given a smooth opportunity at any stage. And as much as I think it was really harsh on Jack Doohan what happened at Alpine, you could argue he at least had that. He had the weekend in Abu Dhabi to get some understanding, then he got a full preseason, then he got the first 5 races and 6 races, not enough, but at least it was all linear in that sense. So I think Lawson's okay for a bit, but definitely want to be keeping an eye on.
Well, look where he finished it. I mean, he was, but I've lost him. 14th between Pierre Gasly and Lance Stroll, 2 drivers who qualified in the top 10. So, he was in there at the meaty end of the stick.
All right, well, let's get a short break in. You're listening to Speed City F1, and we'll be back after a quick break. All right, YouTubers, what's on tap for the rest of the day? We got more Indy 500 testing, qualifying. What else is left? I guess they qualified already. So,
Boy, did you see that Colton Herr crash?
man, I did.
Yeah,
that was big and scary.
But it's pole day, isn't it? And bump day. So
That's
I
right.
don't know if don't know what time exactly it all
6
happens, but yeah, it's
Well,
is it 6 or
so
12?
Yeah, they'll go all afternoon until 6 o'clock because they want to get in happy hour.
Yeah. So yeah, we've had. Oh yeah, I've just found the time actually. So you've got 4:05 to 5:05 today for the top 12. When they will do the 7 to 12 will be locked in. Then 5:15 to 6:15 is last chance qualifying, so we're going to get some bumping. And then they do the top 6, the fast 6, between 6:25 6:55. So it's going to be a late one. Might even still be racing when the golf's going on.
Yep. And TW reminds us that $1 million on the line for the NASCAR All-Star race.
Oof.
That's awesome.
All right for some, isn't it?
That'll
$1
work.
million in Formula One, that's chunk change.
Yeah. I don't actually know what the prize money is anymore for a race, but it's not high. It used to be really, really big. But I
I used to brag about that all the time with people who thought, America's domestic series were so superior. I say, well, if it's money you're interested in, let's consider dividing up about $2 billion a year among the teams in Formula One.
Yeah.
If it's money you're interested in, I like that.
Yeah, well, come on. We're all fairly
Who isn't?
about these things.
I can't
Well,
say.
the headlines were always, Daytona 500, the purse is up to $7 million.
All right, coming back.
Hi, this is Max Verstappen, and you're listening to Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
Oracle Cloud Infrastructure can help you cut your cloud bill in half if you act by May 31st. See if you qualify for half off at oracle.com/formula. All right, we have a few more things we need to get through here. Hey, either one of you guys, Chris, I'll start with you. Did you hear any more about George Russell's car? Because at one point he was complaining about a rear suspension issue.
Yeah, what's interesting is that Mercedes used to send around on the flag and updates explaining things that had gone on, what had gone wrong, and they didn't this weekend. So where we really wanted it and wanted to know, okay, how did that play out? In fact, Miami, they didn't do it either. So the last 2 races, it's slipped through the net for them. So I'm going to have to chase them because that normally would provide explanations for those sorts of things. I heard that, George was complaining pre-race and then obviously during, as we heard on the radio. But the team seemed to say that, there was nothing in it that they could see. His pace was good compared to Antonelli. It was still strong enough and he was committed enough that he made some moves. I do wonder if it was maybe a slight weakness on the car or something that, he will have been feeling, but that wasn't going to be massively detrimental to performance. It was just that it was then knocking his confidence more than anything. Because, Bob will remember this one probably better than I will, but some of the stories about Ayrton Senna and the way that he could feel just the tiniest discrepancies, whether it was in his engine or his machinery, or even when it was the crash he had, was it at Detroit or Dallas, one of the two, where he hit a wall that he'd been an inch from every lap, and he was sure the wall had moved. And Pat Simmons said, he needed to kind of clear his own head, and took me down there to have a look, to sort of point out that I didn't make a mistake. The wall moved, and it turned out that someone else had hit the wall and just towed it out slightly, this concrete barrier. So it was sticking out like another inch than it had been, and therefore he clipped it.
Yeah, I know that story.
Huh. Yeah, well, I just didn't know what was going on with that, but I wanted to follow up because Russell complained, and I thought maybe he had an issue that he called it a rear track rod is what I wrote down, but yeah.
Well, he was kind of guessing.
Yeah,
what it
absolutely.
felt like. And one of the announcers said he may just have a loose wheel, which is pretty serious stuff.
We did have some contact in this race. Only one that I can remember that I saw, I put down in my notes was Sainz and Tsunoda. Did you guys catch that?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if they actually did make contact, though. Just from the camera angles we got, it was clearly very close.
Yes.
And if they didn't touch, it was, it was tiny margins. But I just didn't see anything that guaranteed that they had made contact. But fair play to Yuki, just wasn't giving the place up easily.
Yeah.
And I think Carlos, to me, that was hard racing. It's the shame is that these cars are so complex but ornate as well, and yet fragile, that you want to see those drivers race in that style, but the tiniest bit of contact can cause damage that costs them half a second a lap, and then their race is ruined. So it's a shame when it goes wrong, but I thought that was hard but fair.
Yeah, and like you said, I don't know for sure if it was even contact because there was no, car movement or anything else. But yeah. All right. What else, guys? Let's see here. Let me just run down the finishing order today. See if we've not given anybody their due. Colapinto finished 16th. We talk about Lawson and driver positions, and I mean, look, I know it's Colapinto's first time in the Alpine here. So, any thoughts, Chris?
I thought he looked a little bit ragged early on. Just in that first part of the race, he looked rusty, maybe more than ragged. He made a few little errors going wide at the final or the second to last corner at the Ravazzas, but also there was the run up the hill out of Tosa towards Piratella where he got passed by two cars on the inside on the opening lap or the second lap. And I think those are just they're things that he just needs to get the experience of. So getting himself to the finish was, as I said pre-race, the most important thing for him. And he did that, and he did that without damaging the car or having an incident with anyone else, or I guess doing anything that appeared wrong. It was just get a feel for the car, get an understanding again of the bits that when it matters, I guess, when you've got a good chance of scoring some points that you can't afford to trip up on. So I think he'll be probably disappointed with how the weekend's turned out, but this will be really valuable learning for him to take into next weekend, which again can be really tough. The confidence you need around Monaco. So it's probably Barcelona, which will be the first time to truly judge him. But I was slightly slow getting to your answer there, John, because I was having a little look at some of the quotes that have come in where found out what happened to Ollie Behrman, actually. I'm pretty sure this is with Behrman. In fact, it definitely is. He said that, I don't know if anyone picked up, he made an extra pit stop, and on the broadcast they were saying they thought he was going to retire the car. It was because he had a loose wheel from his pit stop under the virtual safety car.
Oh.
So he'd come in, made the VSC pit stop, gone out, and he was behind George Russell at the time. So he's saying that we were on for a good race, we could have got some points, but my wheel wasn't attached properly, so I had to come back in, get it reattached properly, checked as well. It had to be clearly safe before I could go back out. So yeah, that just ruined his race. And again, with the weekend the way it's gone, we were talking about Haas earlier, but it never rains, but it pours, does it?
Yeah, they're way too distracted by their new motorhome. Any activity by the FIA on that, Chris?
Not that's come in on emails. I'll have a quick check, but no, nothing that they flagged. I think that's one where they'll kind of let it go because the team noticed and rectified it straight away. And that's sometimes all you can do. But for one of the incidents that we were talking about earlier between Leclerc and Albon, the stewards documents come in that's infuriating but understandable, where they've said, we opened an investigation and then took no further action because they voluntarily switched back and gave up the place themselves, and Leclerc gave Albon the position. So we therefore had no need to look into it any further. What you wanted to know is what they would have done, or how they viewed the incident. But instead, they say we had this incident, we were going to investigate it, and then it was pointless as doing so. So we'll never know which way the actual decision would have come down on that front, because as we said earlier, it felt like a very tight decision about whether you could call it a penalty or not.
We haven't talked about the driver of the day, and this does not surprise me. In fact, the headline from Formula One is, who else could it be? Max Verstappen is your F1 driver of the day. I guess that does not surprise anybody after Max's performance. So, yeah, I don't know.
How many times has Max won that? Strikes me that he doesn't often get that nod, whether it's because people
expect him to,
aren't great fans of him, or they have a Brit or an Italian or someone else that they really want to vote for. Somehow that kind of shocks me that Max Verstappen was driver of the day. Very deserving, but he doesn't always get that kind of popular vote, I think.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. One thing we've talked. You know what? Let's take our last break, because after this, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about some broader topics, not necessarily tied to today's race. You're listening to Speed City F1. Back after these messages. All right, let's see what's going on YouTube out here. All right. Bill Ricker says, mics. Yeah, I guess unless there's a specific reason not to have the same mics at home and studio should be make mixing easier and quality consistent. Yep. Yeah. Casey's giving a sarcastic thank you to that, Bill. Yes, we've been talking about Bob's mic. We'll get that done. Let's see. What else?
That's the point. That's the problem. Oh, thank you so much.
Al X says, Herta and Yuki crashes makes me cringe, and how their heads were vulnerable despite the halo tech. Yuki's head almost hit a message board. Yeah, that was a scary crash. I didn't see that, Al, where his head almost hit the message board. But man, remember the controversy that was the halo? That has been completely justified and eliminated, the controversy I'm talking about. It's just,
if it doesn't protect Yuki, who is it going to protect? All 4 feet 11 inches of him, or whatever he is.
Yeah. Will Kyle Larson compete all 1,100 miles? TW says, man, Kyle Larson has been fun to pay attention to, hasn't he? I haven't really a lot, but
yeah. He is. He's an ace, no doubt about it.
Kevin Kelly says Chris is right on Senna. It was Dallas. ... I was there. Good on you.
Wow.
Good for you.
Did you see Senna walking the track afterwards and finding the barrier that did it? Because I'd love to see that. A driver going up and pointing, being like, look, that's what took me out the race. It wasn't me.
That barrier.
Yeah.
All right, coming back.
Hi, this is Gene Haas, and this is Speed City.
Welcome back to the fastest hour in radio, Speed City.
All right, welcome back. All right, I promised a couple of topics not on today's race, but obviously Formula One relevant, and that is the new F1 movie. Last week, when I was homesick with the flu, I saw the announcement and got to watch it immediately of the new trailer, and I have super high hopes. And I saw some. I heard James Vowles. Chris, you were interviewing James Vowles, and he said something that he said the F1 movie could be as monumental as Netflix Drive to Survive. And I was like, wow, that's a big statement. And I thought, could it possibly be, if you could even compare it to the impact that Drive to Survive had, that would be phenomenal. I mean, look, it's Brad Pitt, a huge Hollywood star, Jerry Bruckheimer being the producer. So it definitely, of a Top Gun and other fame, it definitely could. But Bob, what do you think? You think that Brad Pitt and team are going to have the same impact that Netflix Drive to Survive has had on Formula One?
Well, in my long and varied career as a movie critic, I would have to say we got to wait till we see the thing. I mean, I'm sure it will be spectacular to watch. Whether the story makes sense, whether the characters are believable and approachable and all that sort of thing. I mean, I'll say this, they certainly have tried. It seemed like for a while there last year, every time you turned around, you were bumping into Brad Pitt and the Apex team and their garage and preparation area. I mean, it's going to be technically pretty impressive, I'm sure. But we'll see. It's is it just going to be another Fast and Furious, or God forbid, Days of Thunder, or I can't even.
The worst one
remember.
was the Stallone movie.
Yeah, the IndyCar movie.
It was so bad.
Yeah, Driven.
Driven. That's what it was. Oh,
Driven.
That was really, really not good.
I was around for that whole Sylvester Stallone versus Bernie Ecclestone thing. About Sylvester Stallone wanted to do a Formula One movie, but having dealt with Bernie Ecclestone about that very issue, he said no, there won't be a Formula One. These Hollywood people ruin my race weekend with scheduling and all that kind of thing. I might be inclined to read a script, but it can be no death, no drugs, and no John Frankenheimer involvement. Frankenheimer, of course, being the director of Grand Prix.
Yeah. Yeah. I have high hopes too. And look, Lewis Hamilton's involvement, right? It's got to be a good thing, right? And the way the sport has literally opened up its doors, and garage doors included, and allowed such crazy access to the movie. So it's going to have that going for it. But yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, for anyone who didn't hear our midweek show, that when James Vowles was talking about it, but it's because, and anyone who was listening yesterday knows I was wearing a Williams freebie T-shirt because I'd been to Williams on Tuesday, and they invited us down because they wanted to show us some of their facilities, and nothing's particularly new. They're doing a bit of building work at the moment, but it's because they've got 2 wind tunnels at Williams, and one is a 100% size wind tunnel, so they could run a full-size F1 car in there if the rules allowed, but they don't. It has to be 60% scale model maximum. But that's the wind tunnel that was then used by the filmmakers for their wind tunnel scenes and their car development scenes. And they took over for 4 or 5 days in the middle of 2023, I think it was, if not 24, but certainly mid-season. So Williams had to take all their stuff out mid-season and let them take over and film it. But they wanted to use a proper wind tunnel, doing proper aero work, or trying to at least. And they used their own staff, their own actors. They didn't want to have fake engineers in there or something in terms of, they didn't want to create something that wasn't real. They wanted to do it as authentically as they could, even down to wind tunnel work. So the bit that I'm kind of with Bob on is we might watch it and think it's a terrible storyline. We might. I've worked on the book, but I've not been able to see it. So I don't know how the story plays out and in terms of how it would come across as well. But we might think, oh, it's an awful story, or the dialogue's really cheesy, or whatever it might be. But we'll know that everything they've done surrounding watching a car drive on a track, or watching an aspect of Formula One in terms of being in the motorhome or being in the garage or being in the wind tunnel has been done with such detail and attention, and with so much input from existing teams. I think it will be a brilliant attempt at being as authentic as it can when it comes to what you're seeing in terms of track action. Flip side is, obviously, being a Hollywood movie, they can do whatever they want in terms of results or performance or things like that. So we'll see how and what they do on that front. But they've never marketed it as anything outrageous in that sense. I think they've tried to capture the essence of what it's like to be a struggling team, actually, and the whole aspect of your teammate being your biggest rival, as well as someone you're meant to be working with. So the unique aspect of that in Formula One, I think it's really cool what they're trying to do. I don't know if it'll be as big as Netflix, partly because it will have, I imagine, a shorter shelf life. You'll have that peak of people watching it, and then they might tail off more quickly. Netflix obviously having the rolling impact, but also you're asking people to go and spend their money as a one-off, go and make the effort to go to the cinema because it's designed for IMAX. You think with Netflix, so many people already subscribe. You don't subscribe for Drive to Survive necessarily, but it came out so people that were floating fans went, well, I can flick that on. It doesn't cost me anything more. Well, it's already there. I pay for the service, and then you find it. So I don't know if it'll be quite that big. And also now with Valve making that claim, that increases expectation, and how does it reach those expectations? Whereas I think why Drive to Survive did so well is because nobody expected the boom that came off the back of it.
Yeah, particularly Mercedes and Ferrari.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Didn't get involved in the first season.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, there's one more topic, and then I'm going to circle back to the race to wrap up the show. But one more topic is the topic that Chris, you and I touched on this on our midweek show, but I think it's worth talking about, and that is FIA President Mohammed bin Sulayem proposing some changes to the statutes of motorsports governing body that would appear to further extend his control, because the BBC put out they put out a report. They said they've seen a confidential document containing the proposed revisions, which are set to be voted on later next month. So, but the bottom line is that they tended to push more control back to Mohammed bin Sulayem. I guess I don't know. Maybe I'm not doing a good job on this. Chris, you had a better grasp on this, I think. What do you think about this issue?
Yeah, it was certain changes to the way the FIA operates that were being suggested, and a bunch of them seemed to be unnecessary based on the report, because they would, create potentially more power for Ben Sulayem, but in certain areas where he already has it through the way that he can impact the personnel that are within certain committees and departments of the FIA, if that makes sense, rulemaking committees. So he would have had, his jurisdiction is already pretty significant there, and it was just sounding like it was shoring up even more. Flip side is, I did ask the FIA for comment on it, didn't get one at all, didn't get response. It's clearly a very touchy subject. It's the fact that this has been, when it's leaked to the BBC, it's clearly something that's concerned someone fairly high up. They want that to reach as far as they can. And we've had that a lot over the last 2 years. So this tallies with every previous one that seems to have concerned people within the FIA as well. And we've had a number of leaders of...
all of this before. All of this before.
I'm afraid to ask, Bob, but look,
all around you, dude.
Yeah. So what about your take on that conflict of interest, Bob, of Carlos Sainz Sr.? When I heard about Carlos Sainz Sr. possibly running, I was excited. I thought, okay. And of course, there's that potential conflict of interest, but for some reason, and I don't think I've ever spoken to Carlos Sainz Sr., but my quick instinct was that's not going to be a problem for him. And I don't know why I say that even.
Well, yeah, I don't see it as a conflict of interest. There's not a financial incentive. I'm not sure what the FIA president could do to benefit a single driver, and especially try to get away with it when that driver is your son. I really, if the transparency is there and the support for the FIA is there, I don't see it. How could there be a conflict of interest there?
Yeah, I think there's a slight concern is the fact you say if the transparency is there, and right now it's not there. You'd hope it would be changed, but I can see it that it would need discussing, and he just would need to put safeguards in place, because if, for example, in 2021, Jos Verstappen was the FIA president, or Anthony Hamilton, and you have that finale and that decision made by a race director, one way or another, people are going to be asking huge questions on conflict of interest. Now, and that's a scenario that happened without either of those two being in position. So you can see when it comes down to the biggest prizes, who knows, maybe Williams are fighting for a championship in future, that could become a bit tricky. So they'd need to prove it. I do think it's less of one than was cited when it was Susie Wolf's name was put into the ring a little bit, because obviously Toto financially would make a huge amount of money out of being a part owner of Mercedes, depending on directions the FIA might take. But similarly, that doesn't mean that you can't explore it and say, right, could we put safeguards in place here or not? But I do think that, there's the potential for small things, but I'm with you. I don't think anything that should really mean he couldn't run. And if anyone was concerned about that or didn't feel that he was had the integrity to do that job, then they wouldn't vote for him to go into the position.
Well, exactly.
All right. Well, we just got a little over a minute left. I wanted to end the show with my excitement for the 2025 season so far, right? Look, you said it earlier, Chris, 22 points between the top three drivers, Piastri, Norris, and Verstappen. And then, George Russell in the Mercedes right behind him. And then a good day by the Ferraris. They're in fifth and sixth, Leclerc and Hamilton. And all the new rookies that we've got that are performing well. Antonelli, Behrman, Hajar. There's so much to be excited for this season. And, we are at the end of a rules regulation, and, that can mean a couple things, but it's just exciting right now that we have so much to get excited about for Formula One. And we're right in the middle of a triple header, and we've got Monaco coming up next. So it is a fantastic time to be a Formula One fan, I'll have to say. And things like the movie and Drive to Survive. But all right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. And don't forget, coming up in the middle of the week, we've got Wheel to Wheel that Chris hosts for us. And you can hear that on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. But thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks, Chris Medland. Thanks, Bob Varsha. And we'll talk to you next week.